Oh, there we go. Sorry. Thank you. Welcome to the January 15th. We always have to have something to start the meeting. January 15th, 2025 meeting of the Town of Plymouth, Massachusetts Advisory and Finance Committee in the Great Hall of Town Hall of the great town of Plymouth. We will go right to the call of order of our committee members. When I call your name, please say yes or here. And if you are not, then remain silent. I will go first to Ms. Butler.
I am here.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. Mr. Dunn. Okay, I don't see you. Mr. Green.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Howard.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Lally.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Malaguti. Oh, I saw him. Okay. Ms. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. Pizarro.
Here.
Ms. Richards.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Ms. Tompkins.
Here.
And Mr. Trudell.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format, which means that some of us are here in person and others are attending this meeting virtually. The ground rules here are any speaker giving public comment is allotted up to 5 minutes in which to speak. You may give public comment at the beginning or end of the meeting or at any time during an issue that you might want to weigh in on. This meeting will be airing on Comcast 9, Verizon 47, or on PAC TV's YouTube channel, which can be viewed at pactv.org/stream. Anyone who would like to attend the meeting can do so through Zoom, through your computer, through your phone, whatever means you access Zoom, using our meeting code 995-2986-0638, and our meeting password is 100131. That's 995-2986-0638. Meeting passcode 100131. You may join by telephone if you wish by dialing 929-205-6099 and entering the meeting code and the passcode that I just gave you. We will not see you we will in person, but we will see that you are attending the meeting by phone. The views of the members of this committee are their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the view of the committee. That was my idea to put that in there. So, is there somebody from the public that would like to start us off with a public comment? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we will go right to the agenda. So tonight we will be talking about Article 11, Article 12, Article 15, and Article 19. Let's get to work.
Mr. Chair, are we going to approve the minutes first?
The minutes were approved in the last meeting. Okay. Bruce, Mr. Howard, you okay with that? Okay. You're not responding. Okay. Let's go to Article 11, the Facility Capital Stabilization Fund. We have Town Manager Derek Berdisi on the phone right now. This article is to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money to the Facility Capital Maintenance Stabilization as authorized by the provisions of General Law, Chapter 40, Subchapter 5B, as amended, or take any other action relative thereto. I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Rendisi, and we will follow that up with any questions. And we do wish you well in your recovery.
Oh, thank you so much. I apologize I couldn't be there in person. So good evening, everybody. Derek Berdisi, Town Manager. I'm here to present two articles this evening. I'll start with the Facility Capital Stabilization Fund. As you all know, this request is to deposit an additional $500,000 into this stabilization account. This falls in line with what we had done last year. We had added an additional $500,000 last year as well. This is a select board goal to continue to invest into this account. This account could be used for various purposes. So, for example, unforeseen circumstance with one of our facilities or multiple facilities. Depending on its growth over years, it could be used for a capital investment, such as a new fire station. It could be used for a down payment on a capital investment. So it has a lot of purposes moving forward. But the board, through its select board goals that they develop each and every year, wanted to continue to invest into this account. The current balance is $6.7 million. So it'll take it approximately about $7.2 million if the town meeting approves it in April.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Mr. Howard, you can start us off. The floor is yours.
Mr. Brindisi, I was a little surprised, perhaps it was simply an oversight, that the amount was not in the memorandum provided
Are you
for
referring
either
to
the capital
the
stabilization fund or the nuclear stabilization fund. Was that an oversight?
Are you referring to the balance in the current account?
No, the amount to be added to the
Oh,
balance.
gotcha.
It
Yeah,
is
no, you're
omitted
right.
from both memos.
Right, yeah, I'm looking at it now. It is an additional $500,000. That's definitely an oversight.
Okay, and we did receive a
Thank
memo
you.
dated December 18th with the $500,000 ask for both the stabilization funds. Okay, Mr. Green, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Derek, for hopping on. I had a question on how much money has been, withdrawn or spent on this fund. Have we taken money out during this fiscal year? And then maybe this replaces what we've taken, but I was just curious about what the ins and outs were looking like.
No, that's a great question, Mr. Green. So I've been here since 2022, and we have not withdrawn any money from this account over the last 3 years. We don't expect to withdraw any money anytime soon. Right now, the vision is to continue to invest into this account to ensure that we have a nest of available dollars, that if we come into a situation like was reported years ago, back in 2018, 2019, where many of our fire stations were such in disrepair, we didn't have the bandwidth and the resource in order to recover from that. So there's been a lot of intention on trying to prevent that from happening in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Brindisi? Okay, Mr. Lally, would you be so kind as to move to approve Article 11?
I move to approve Article 11 and
Thank
the
you so much.
$500,000 as presented.
Perfect. And Ms. Richards, would you like to second that motion?
I'll second that motion.
So we have a first from Mr. Lally and a second from Ms. Richards. Any discussion on the committee here? Hearing and seeing none, we will vote on whether to approve Article 11. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn, still not here, okay. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
And Mr. Trudell. Thank you. 11 vote in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstentions. Article 11 has our approval. Okay. Moving on to Article 12, the Nuclear Mitigation Stabilization Fund, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds $500,000 to the Nuclear Mitigation Stabilization Fund is authorized by the provisions of General Law, Chapter 40, Subchapter 5B as amended, or take any other action thereto. And just wanted to make a note to this committee that last year at this time, when this article came up, we rejected it by a vote of 2 in favor and 12 opposed. And the thought at that time, if you all remember, was that we had had some real tough discussions about budget shortfalls and capital crunch and all, and this committee felt like that $500,000 was not a good use of money at the time. So a year later, I'm curious what everybody thinks. Now, in the end, town meeting reps did vote to approve that $500,000, which is why the stabilization fund has the extra $500,000 from last year. So, Mr. Brindisi, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks again. So similar to the last article, we are recommending to transfer an additional $500,000 into the Nuclear Mitigation Stabilization Fund. The current balance is about $9.7 million. This would bring in, obviously north of $10 million. So the purpose of this account, primarily when it was created, was to help the town mitigate the shortfall of loss of revenues from the closure of the nuclear power plant. So it has a couple of different purposes. So one purpose it could be used for is to use to maybe help offset lost revenues through our tax base. For example, say we need an additional $1 million to help cover operating costs. In theory, we could use this money for that purpose. But the primary motivator behind this stabilization account, as you all know, is really to focus on the acquisition of the 1,500 acres that is currently owned by Holtec. So we believe at some point in the future, Holtec will be willing to negotiate, although we've asked many times, to negotiate a purchase price of this property. We would expect the acquisition of the Holtec property to be somewhere in the $25 to $35 million range, based upon recent estimates. That could change in 5, 6, 7 years from now, but that's kind of the most recent estimate. So, this additional $500,000 would again, give us more resources to help us and put us in a better negotiation position moving forward. If we were to go down that road, certainly we could use these funds. We would couple that with CPC funds. And then we would also be working with state officials on other state open space and recreation grants as well in order to acquire that property. But in the meantime, we are working on a master plan for all 1,500 acres at Holtec. Our Director of Planning and Development, Lee Hartman, was able to work with the local Economic Development Foundation and get a $380,000 grant to hire a consultant firm to help us master plan the 1,500 acres, which we would expect the majority of that property, again, to stay in open space and recreation moving forward. So pending any other questions, that's what I have for tonight's presentation on this account.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brindisi. And Ms. Richards, you had your hand up first, I believe. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. It was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, which happens occasionally, that the Nuclear Mitigation Stabilization Fund was initially, and this was my thought process, put in place to help mitigate the tax deficit that would be put in play, that would occur with Holtec not being, or the nuclear power plant not paying their full share of the tax. And so as they wind down, they're not paying us the same tax. Is that still the case? And are they now paying less tax?
Yeah, so those are all great questions. So I'll try to help answer some of those. So when I was the assistant town manager, so it goes back to 2015-16 time period, Holtec was paying approximately $11 million, as I recall, in taxes per year. Most recently, with its closure, their assessment has gone down dramatically. They are no longer producing power, as you all know. They signed a pilot agreement with the town about 18 months ago, and it's an 8-year pilot agreement. Excuse me. And they're paying approximately $2 million a year in taxes. Could be a little bit north of $2 million, but it's about $2 million a year in taxes right now. So yeah, we've already seen a dramatic decrease in how much that property is paying the town as far as taxes. As far as your question on the use of this account, you're 100% right. When they thought of creating this account, I think there was some nervousness that once we started to see a decrease in taxes, there was going to have to be a gap that was going to have to be filled. And so that's why they created the account. The prior select board town manager started to transfer money into this account for that day when it came where they were no longer generating enough revenue, but they still had to pay the operating budget. So we really haven't approached the point where we cannot cover our operating costs with the existing new growth and the existing 2.5%. But certainly, if we got to that point where, like I mentioned earlier, say we were short, say $1 million in our operating budget, we certainly have access to these dollars, and that, in my mind, that would be one purpose that we could use these dollars for.
Could I have a follow-up?
You may.
And I understand that, that we haven't seen the need to use that money for, to offset our tax revenue. However, I don't think the new growth is what's been driving our tax base. I think the assessments and the value of the properties is what has increased our taxes. For myself, personally, I've seen my tax bill go up enormously. So I think the residents of Plymouth have been seeing their taxes increase. So I don't see that taking $500,000 and putting it in a stabilization fund for purchasing the property, and then saying we don't really need it to cover the taxes, but we're increasing the taxes of the residents. It doesn't make sense to me financially. So that's just my thought, and thank you for your response.
And thank you, Ms. Richards.
Just so I'm clear, any use of any one of these stabilization accounts, we would have to go back to town meeting and seek authorization in order to withdraw from these accounts. So we can't, when I say we, the select board, the administration can't arbitrarily withdraw from these accounts. It must take town meeting action.
Okay, so with that action, would that help mitigate some of the tax increase from the recent, the assessments, as Ms. Richards said, I mean, it's not unknown in this town, all the way across the town, that there are a number of kind of frustrated taxpayers that have, it's just part of the inflation of the real estate market. There's no doubt about that. So it's hurting everybody all across the town. Is there any way that this fund can then turn around with town meeting approval and start to mitigate some of that increase and get some relief?
Well, while you're talking, Mr. Nam, I'm doing back of the napkin math. I would say that for every $500,000 saved, again, this is back of the napkin, it's about $20 per household, across the board. So obviously homes that are higher value homes, maybe it saves a little bit more, less value homes saves a little bit less. But in essence, that's what you'd be saving. So if you choose not to advance this article forward to town meeting, because you want to save $500,000, what you're saying is, each home, they'll benefit about $20 for the year with that $500,000 not going to that account.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate there, then what is the extra 500,000 in the stabilization fund going to get for the town?
It'll go into an account. So again, what I'm hearing most often is that certainly select board members and others from the community really have their eyes set on acquiring the 1,500 acres or a large portion thereabout once Holtec is ready to put that property up for sale. So that is the primary motivator at this point. But like I mentioned earlier, it also could be used as a way to mitigate, the tax base.
Okay, any other? Mr. Lawler, the floor is now yours.
Good evening, Derek. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
When was the last time you communicated with Holtec about the quote-unquote availability of this land?
Yeah. So we had been communicating with them, I want to say spring, so maybe a little less than a year ago, we were communicating with them. We were looking towards a purchase and sale agreement. We had a gentleman's agreement on a purchase price, and when we went to execute an offering, the CEO and owner of Holtec withdrew his offer. And we've since asked if they wanted to get back to the negotiation table, and he's declined to meet with the town.
Is the land available for purchase?
To my knowledge, it's not available. It's not available right now.
I'm just trying to figure out, so these monies, of course, the 500,000 is pretty much directed towards the fund to purchase the land when it comes available. And then again, my question is, like, when is it available? I didn't know that you people had already approached them and that the land at one point recently was available. So that means that it could be available within the next couple of years, next 5 years. I mean, we're socking away monies
Mm-hmm.
in a critical time where things are really tight. And I'm just wondering if the land is not going to be available for some given point in time, then why are we doing this?
Because we don't know. If Holtec called us tomorrow, we would be back at the table negotiating the purchase price, which we were about a year ago. And then, unfortunately, the folks that we were dealing with felt like they could represent the owner of Holtec. And once the owner of Holtec got involved, he decided to take the offer off the table, and they walked away. We've since reached out to them, asked if they're willing and able to sit down and renegotiate, and they've declined to meet. So here we are. They may call us this summer and say they're ready for whatever reason, or they may not call us for another 5 years. We don't know, but we're going to continue to try.
Were you putting an offer on the whole 1,500 acres at that time?
No, it was approximately 900 acres.
I'm sorry?
It was approximately 900 acres, the most valuable open space parcels that are available on that 1,500 acres. As you know, there's an area that's already been heavily disturbed. That's probably more appropriate for like light industrial use. But we were mostly focused on, and only primarily because we have a number of state partners that want to work with us, who are very interested in preserving that land. So because we had state partners who were interested in preserving the land, it was logical to sit down and try to negotiate that land first.
Is it possible you can disclose to us what your offer was at the 900 acres?
I would say this, that it was in between $18 and $24 million.
Mr. Snyder, you had your hand up first. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the town manager. Two questions. First of all, the past two articles here, we're talking about $16 million, more than that, in the account. What is that earning currently for the town?
Good to see you, Mr. Snyder. The earnings on the nuclear mitigation over the life of its account it's a little shy of $2.5 million. And the facility stabilization earnings are about $600,000.
Thank you. And also, I know in the previous two towns I served in, that the stabilization fund was a big part of the bond rating that the town got. Do these two things count toward that bond rating?
I would defer to our finance director on that. I know you are definitely referring to the general stabilization account, which definitely affects our bond rating. I don't believe these two accounts would affect our bond rating because they're not required by law, unlike the general stabilization.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Pizarro, and then I know there's interest to my left.
Thank you. Through the chair, good evening, Mr. Brindisi. I just have two questions. One, similar to the question in the previous article, has any monies been dispersed from the stabilization fund, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no. And like I said, I've been here since 22, and I can guarantee you that no dollars have been dispersed from those two accounts over the past 3 years. I can't speak to the history of these accounts prior to my arrival, but I'm happy to get that information for you.
Thank you. That's fine. It just seems that it's, for lack of a better term, a kind of a savings account that we're doing for strategic initiatives that we want to do potentially in the future. So
Sure.
For both articles. My second question is, there's an agreement in place, I believe it's binding, that the town has first right of refusal if this parcel comes to the market again. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
We have
then,
9 months first right of refusal.
right. And then when you were having these discussions with Holtec and for the 900 acres, was that agreement in place at that time?
Yes.
Okay, so we did have a right of refusal for up to the 1,600 acres at that time.
That is correct. Yep,
Okay.
that is a very good point, but yes, that is true.
All right. No, thank you for your answers. I'm supportive of the direction that we're headed with this particular stabilization fund. I know that, well, at least my opinion is that if you come to the table as a town with some monies and you reach out to the state, it's a better position to be in than just asking without any money. So
Absolutely.
it's a great partnership position to be put in. So I'll be supporting this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pizarro. I'm going to go to Mr. Malaguti first. Did you have your hand up? And then over to Mr. Lally after him.
Yes, I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Lally. He had his up before me. Oh, are you sure? Thank you. Good evening, Good evening, Mr. Brindisi. I just have one question, actually two questions on this, sorry. The first, and this is segueing with Mr. Pizarro's question for the use of the fund. I believe also within the language too was also the use of the fund for any legal fees pertaining to either the acquisition of the property or for any other pilot agreement renegotiations, if I'm correct.
I don't have the original article language in front of me, Mr. Malaguti, but I believe you are correct.
And the other question / comment that I have is I'm supportive of putting money into this account. In my opinion, I think until we have more definitive, it should have been just a little bit less. I think that we could have, especially with other concerns within the budget and other projects that we have going on, I would have probably have in my opinion, done a little bit less, but still put money into it. But I am supportive of putting the money into this account at this time. But I would ask in the future, even if it's like 100,000 less or something like that, because we're still going to have money and interest bearing on it, but looking at budgetary constraints and maybe looking at still putting money in, but not an entire lump sum like that at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malaguti. I'm going to go to Mr. Lally. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. How much was approved at town meeting last year?
500,000.
Same amount, okay. Is there not a study going on right now about potential uses for this land? I saw an email inviting people to attend.
I believe it's an open discussion next month.
Okay.
Is that the land, I was going to actually ask that question, is that the land that they're going to be discussing, the community is going to be asked for its input? Mr. Burdisi?
Yes, so the planning department has kicked off a master planning process for the 1,500 acres. That was the $350,000 EDA grant I referenced Mr. Hartman and Mr. Cole from the foundation jointly applying for. And so they were able to bring in those dollars so that we could hire a consultant to come in and help us master plan those 1,500 acres. So the idea is when the land does become available, instead of being reactionary and thinking, okay, now the land's available, what do we want to do with it? We're already going to have a plan. If this area is going to be set aside for open space, this area over here is going to be set aside for light industrial, and so on and so forth. So we really are hoping we're going to get the community input so the community can help drive that decision making so we have a plan that's ready for when that day becomes available. And I think Mr. Hartman's, he may be in the audience, so I'm sure he can provide further detail on that process.
Thank you. He is here, and we might call on him.
So I don't know if you're able to answer this, but with the purchase of this land, is it bondable? Can we take a loan for it? Can the town take a loan for it?
Yes, thank you.
So at its current balance, we have about a 30% down payment in my back of the envelope math. And furthermore, there is potential to reduce that potential debt with the sale, I'm going to use that word, of the land that you say might be viable for non-public space, such as the industrial development or even, for that matter, residential development. I'm not familiar with the shoreline yet along that part of the town. But ultimately, the cost of the town might be something far less than whatever the purchase price is by about maybe a third or more, because it would be sold off for other uses. Is that a fair statement, potentially?
Well, Mr. Lally, if you are using the number I threw out there to do your math, just as a reminder, that purchase price was based upon approximately 900 acres of open space. So, we'd still have to negotiate another 500 acres or thereabouts for the remaining parcels of land. So, I think that if we wanted to buy all 1,500 acres, it certainly would be north of the $20 million range that I threw out there. We may be closer to a $28 to $32 million range. So I don't know if you get the complete return on your investment.
So this is just for the 900. You were quoting
arithmetic.
that range up to as high as 20, in the 20s somewhere. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And when do we have some sense of when that study for potential uses of public space might be complete? Any idea? Is it years?
I will defer that to Mr. Harmon, only because I'm going to take advantage of him sitting there.
Okay.
Okay.
Save your voice.
Lee Hartman, Director of Planning, Town of Plymouth, approaching the podium.
Good evening. 18 months, it's on, we're on. 18 months is the timeline. So the first, I'll just go in since you asked a little bit briefly about it. So the first step is we have a survey out there asking people what they want. Then we're going to have a public forum. Then there'll be a joint meeting with the Planning Board, Select Board, Economic Development Foundation. The consultants, Sasaki Associates, will report back to the three boards indicating what they've heard from the survey and from the community. And then they'll look at those, for example, let's buy all 1,500 acres. Then they'll go back and tell the town, okay, this is what it's going to cost. Somebody says, how about a resort conference center? Okay, well, here are the challenges or the positives about that. What happens, somebody else says it's all residential, what is the implications of that? So, public forum, feedback from the select board and planning board, they'll go back and say, here are 3 scenarios that may work. Here's what they'll cost, the upsides and downsides. Go back to the community and say, here's some options, what are you prepared to do? Go back to the selectmen and say, here are the positives and negatives of what you could do, what's your preferred alternative. We're also working very closely with Holtec on this as we go through the process. So my hope too is as we go through this process, we build a stronger relationship with Holtec, and that once they see some of this, that we might have a better deal or a better opportunity to go in for acquisition. I think in every case I've heard, I don't want to speak for the community, but a fair, majority of this site, I think the goal is to permanently protect as open space.
Okay.
I'll save my further remarks for discussion.
Thank you. Okay, hearing no further discussion, Ms. Butler, would you like to move to approve Article 12?
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Green, would you care to second that motion, please?
Seconded.
Thank you so much. We have a first from Ms. Butler, a second from Mr. Green. We are in discussion now on whether or not to recommend town meeting approve Article 12. And we're going to go back to Mr. Lally.
So last year, when we were discussing this in terms of priorities and managing dollars, you know, there's the must do, the should do, the nice to do, and the don't do. And again, I feel this is a very nice thing to do. But as compared to the facility reserve that we just put aside, you know, that's a must-do, because facilities will, you know, have surprises for us. I think the other thing is that, you know, this is a nuclear mitigation fund to damper the tax levy, and instead it's turned into a savings account for land acquisition. And until I think there's some direction about what the uses of the land might be, I think that I'm not going to vote for this, let me put it this way, because I think, one, we have a significant war chest. You know, $9.5 million is a significant down payment. I'd rather see it being used to do what I think the fund is intended to do, which is to mitigate the imposition. Going from $11 million a year to $2 million a year on one single taxpayer on a large parcel of land is a pretty significant impact to the taxpayer. And despite the inflation news today, it's still a burden on most people. So I just can't support it at this time. It really is a nice thing to do. I would love to do it, but I just can't support it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lally. Ms. Richards, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. And to echo Mr. Lally's statements, I would agree with that. I believe when this fund was authorized by the provisions of General Law, Chapter 40, Section 5B, it was to alleviate the tax levy. And according to the latest memo that we received, the current balance is $9.9 million. So we're just shy of $10 million in this fund at the moment. I think that does represent about a third of the down payment. We can certainly borrow it if we needed to, considering our borrowing capacity. And the only reason that we're not looking at this as tax levy is because our taxes have gone up to cover our tax burden. So, yeah, I think I would agree. I'm not going to support this, even though it does only represent $20 per household. It's $20. And I think we need to start dipping into this, not for land acquisition. And if you want a land acquisition fund, then we should start one.
It's called the land bank.
It's called the land bank that we already voted for. Yes, agreed. So I am not going to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. I'm going to go across to my right to Mr. Green. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would say to my fellow members that if you think this fund is a land use savings account and you think that's a good idea, then by all means vote for it. But if you think this is a tax stabilization fund, I think the odds that money ever comes out of here and gets voted on by town meeting to supplement the budget, I just have low confidence that that's ever going to happen. So if you want to make this a savings account for the Holtec property, then vote yes. But I think that there's better uses. My taxes are up 10.5% this year, and I will take any relief I can get. So I will not be voting for this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I'm going back to my right. Mr. Snyder, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. The reason I asked that question earlier about the stabilization fund is because if you have money in that account, it does help with Moody, because that's how they go, one of the things they go by. These accounts are not stabilization funds. The Facility Capital Fund and the Nuclear Mitigation Fund are not stabilization funds, according to Moody. So they're not going to include these in improving the bond rating of the town. For that reason, I see absolutely zero reason to invest in this, and I'm voting down.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Going back, I think, Mr. Lawler, your hand was up first, and then I'll go to Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Considering the economic situation that the town is in with the increase in taxes, I will not be voting for this. I think that we have enough money in this fund, but also thank you for reminding me that we did vote a land bank, and that's going to get
We'll get rich
a lot of money in
in
it.
a few years.
And that's what the intent was for that, and that's what this particular account is turning out to be. And I would go along with what Ms. Richards had said, and it probably turn this back into a subsidized account where we turn it back into, or reverse it back into some sort of tax relief of some sort. I'm sure that Lynn can get creative on that, but that's the way I'm going to be voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. And Ms. O'Connor, the floor is now yours.
I will also not be voting for this. I don't think we're being proper stewards of the taxpayers' money. Echoing the other opinions, it's not the use of the funds. And I think we're going about it the wrong way if we're looking at it as $20 per taxpayer or homeowner. It's actually all of the money over the years that we've lost. So it's short-sighted to look at it in the scope of what we would be paying per homeowner this year. So I think echoing the thoughts of the others.
Okay, thank you, Ms. O'Connor. And I'm going back over here to Mr. Malaguti. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm in 100% agreement with all of my colleagues here. I will be voting for it on two reasons. One, I think we should have, and even though we do have a substantial amount of money in there right now for possible acquisition of the property when and if it becomes available, but I do think we could use this as a tool that other funds have been done in the past and are currently being done. Especially, I can use the environmental affairs account that we have money going into that from the solar pilots, and that is being used as seed money to apply for other grants and use it as matching funds for. While I am not pleased that we keep using the same amount year after year to be added to this, and we could have probably reduced it maybe even in half going into this fund for this year to cover other needs. I think that once we do have the study done, then we can basically look at saying, okay, well, we may only need this amount to it, and then we can start using it as a reverse fund, as we're talking about, and start flinging it back to the taxpayer so that we can say, okay, we may only need 7 million of it to actually use as matching funds, and now we can disperse the other 2 million, either put into the facility stabilization account, use it as a reduction on the tax base or something like that. So while I am voting for it, I do have in my mind the exact same feelings that the rest of the colleagues do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malaguti, for that thought. Okay, Ms. Tompkins, the floor is now yours.
I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you very much. And to Dan's point, I do think the town wants to purchase Holtec. I think this is a tool, another tool in the toolbox to make us well positioned for that purchase. And when we own the land, we control the land. So I think this is a proactive, long-term item that we should invest in instead of being reactive when things become available. So I will be voting in support of this.
And that would be 2 years in a row. Any other comments? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we will go to the roll call. Ms. Butler, how do you vote on Article 12?
No.
I thought we did. Yep, we did. Yep, we had a motion from Ms. Butler, and Mr. Green had seconded it, and so now we are opposed by Ms. Butler. Mr. Green?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
No?
Mr. Lawler?
No.
Mr. Malaguti?
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
No.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
And Mr. Trudell?
No.
So I have 3 to 8? 3, 4, and 8 against? Is that what you had?
I have 4-8.
4 and 8.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So once again, the Advisory and
No
Finance.
abstentions.
No abstentions. Once again, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends that town meeting reject Article 12 for all the reasons that we had, and I encourage the town meeting reps to get the recording of our discussion before town meeting so they can hear some interesting points for and against. Okay, moving along to Article 15, the Town Promotion Fund. And so Mr. Hartman, Director of Planning and Development, is going to take us through this. This is receipts collected through the 6% hotel motel tax, increased by 1.72% from last year. And shall I let you
Yeah,
go?
you could almost do the presentation, but yeah, sure.
I don't want to take the,
Thank you.
excitement away from your
So-
presentation and make it seem like you came here for no good reason. So I'll let you take
All
over
right,
from
so
here.
I'm not going to refer to it, but I'm just showing you, so this is put together by Plymouth, our partners for tourism, and this just gives you a flavor of where some of this money goes and the advertising that's done. Lee Filson from Plymouth is here tonight, too, if you have questions, and 2 members of the Visitor Services Board happens to be here, Steve Lyden, the chair, and Everett Malaguti, who also sits on that board. So I would start by saying in 1992, the town had the foresight to take 45% of the local hotel motel tax and put it into this separate promotion fund. Very few towns ever do this. It's fairly unique. And the other 55%, I would say, just goes into the general fund, and that's used to pay all the other bills that you are dealing with as we go through town meeting. So this 45% has been set aside each year since 1992. So as you pointed out, it is about a 1.72% increase over last year's budget. So when we look at the whole motel hotel tax, and that also includes short-term rental, I'll point out, it represents $3,013,000 roughly that comes into the town. That 45% amount is that 1.35 million No, I'm sorry. Yes, 1.355 million that goes into the promotion fund. And as you can see in the memo, a chunk of that, about $5,465,000 goes to see Plymouth to do the advertising you see up there and to run the visitor center and bathrooms on the waterfront. I would point out that in that case and in the other case I'll point out as we go through here, that represents about 25% of the total funds. The rest of the funds for the promotions you see and running the bathroom come from memberships. It's a membership-driven nonprofit that See Plymouth, and also comes from matching funds from the state and other grants. The rest of the money is used to support a whole series of events that occur in the community, events that I think many of you are familiar with. The second page of the memo I gave you lists all the events that are being supported by the promotion fund this year. The special act also says a minimum of 10% shall be spent for public improvements. And again, if you look at that list, some of the things we've done with the holiday decorations, the tree that you see out front, some of the summertime decorations that are out there, trash cans, signage, a lot of things that the town DPW, Parks and Forestry, that we support also through this account. So it's a great way to do this. And then again, as you look at the events like the Thanksgiving parade or the 4th of July parade, they're matched. The money we provide is matched 4-to-1 by those events. So again, this is great seed money. It's a great way to do it where the Visitor Services Board doesn't necessarily look to just simply give money to people. They look for money that's going to be matched, and it's more of a challenge to, say, the Thanksgiving parade that we'll give you this money, but your challenge is to match it with a 4-to-1 match. I also like to point out that when you look at this and you look at that amount of money, that $3 million, if you do the mathematical equation, we find that that represents $50 million that comes to the town just in the room rental rates for the town. So we know that just when you come in here and spend a night, you're spending $50 million. And then if you look at that and say, well, that represents when we go on vacation about 20% of what we spend. The other is food, entertainment, going on a whale watch, going to the Plymouth Patuxent Museum, some of the other things you do while you're on vacation. And if you say that that represents about 20%, we can confidently say that about $250 million comes to this town just for the visitors who spend a night or an overnight. That doesn't include day trippers. So we know that tourism is such a big part of our economy in this town. It's a big driver. It's what keeps many of the things going on downtown and waterfront vibrant. And I also like to point out that when I mentioned that $250 million that comes to the town, that's not just going to Marriott or going to the Hilton. Those are going to local accountants, local electricians, local plumbers too. So this money that we're generating through tourism supports a lot of different things in this community, a lot of industries. So again, we're here to answer questions. I think it's a great program. We've been doing it since 1992. This is a article that you see each and every year. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Mr. Lally, I saw your hand first. The floor is yours.
What kind of reserve does the visitor center have, and do they close out to themselves, or if they have surpluses, do they close back to the town?
Yes, so it's a contract. So every 3 years we go out to bid for a contract. So it's a contract amount. So no, there's no reserve. It's a year to year to run that. What we have done, if you look, I believe there's some in this thing, in this breakdown, but the Visitor Services Board has set aside money a few times now for maintenance to the visitor center. And again, it's a town-owned building. It's occupied and used by See Plymouth, but we have set aside money to help do improvements to that facility. And the money from this account has been used over the years to do various improvements out there.
Thank you, Mr. Lally. And Mr. Green, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. I'm just curious if we capture this excise tax on like Airbnbs, Verbos, et
Yes,
cetera.
so we do. I think it's very underestimated in this community. So when we look, so in Plymouth, we have the 6% tax, that is assessed to Airbnbs or short-term rentals, because it's not just Airbnbs. So we have a 6% tax, plus town meeting voted to authorize a second 3% tax above and beyond that. So I can pretty confidently tell you what's going on just by looking at that 3% tax, and then you know what the 6% is. And so, I have that paper here somewhere. There it is. So that represents, we're taking in this year about 40,000 in short-term rental. I know that that's a bigger number in this town, but it's, again, who reports the tax and who's filing those taxes with the Commonwealth. So it represents 40,000, which is somewhere around 3.5% of the total hotel motel tax we take in.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Snyder, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman, what percentage of the $3 million goes to the VSB? Just curious.
So the Visitor Services Board is the committee that's in charge of overseeing the expenditure of the amount. So the 45%, the 1.355 million, all of that is looked at by the VSB. And again, what happens starting right now, we have applications out for any town agency for public improvements or any of the organizations out there looking to have events. They will put their requests into the VSB, and then the VSB will review and rank those requests and then allocate the money.
Okay.
If there are more requests than we have funds, then Thanksgiving Parade, totally making this up, looks for $50,000, maybe they get 45, and we have to look at giving less money to each group, or, and I always do that, I say we like I have a vote. They would then look at that. Or we have had years we've been fortunate to fund every request that has come in. They also, from time to time, will keep some of the money aside so that if in the middle of July something spectacular shows up that nobody anticipated, that we may have some money too.
Well, I think this is a wonderful thing. It's a great investment, and it brings back many, many times what we invest in it. So it's a no-brainer, in my opinion.
I also just will point out that my other concern or the challenge is now that what I'll call post-New Orleans, this money also goes and does a lot to support these events for public safety, which is critical this day and age. And so again, I think more and more now, especially this year, there will be increased demands for public safety in these events, and this money is critical because these are all everything the Visitor Services Board gives out is to nonprofits. So this is not going to for-profits. You have to be a nonprofit. So nonprofits, whether it's the chamber, the Thanksgiving Parade, they're struggling every year to be able to get the revenue they need to hold these events, and public safety is a big part of that, and I think it's going to just continue to get bigger as we live in these dangerous times.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hartman. I see Mr. Pizarro, your digital hand is up. The floor is yours.
Yes, Mr. Hartman, thank you for your, I have a question for you through the chair. I'm not a longtime Plymouth resident, moved here about 6 years ago from the Midwest. So this hotel tax or hotel fee, 45% goes to the promotion and 55% goes to the general fund. Is that correct from what I heard earlier?
Correct.
And then when did that happen? Did that always be that way, or was it always was it in its initial tax and fee of the hotel, it was 100% to the general fund, or was it always that breakdown?
So originally, the hotel motel tax was 3%. And then the state had a local option, and I'm trying to see if I can eyeball when it was, a local option that allowed us to go from 3% to 6%. So for many years, it was a 3% tax, and then it has gone up to a 6%.
And then I guess my follow-up to that is that, was it always a 45-55 distribution?
Correct. So what happened is, because the state doesn't like the towns to put money into special funds, You're not normally allowed to do that. So again, it was a special act that the town filed. State gave us special legislation that said you can do this, but you must do 45, and that's what it was and has been since 1992. And so if we wanted to ever change that, we'd have to go back to the state legislature and say, we want to go instead of 45 to 35, or instead of 45 to 55. So it would take an amendment to that special legislation, would have to go to town meeting, and then back to the state legislature for approval.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any other comments? I had a question for you, Mr. Hartman. Last year, we had a spirited discussion about improving our docks for the cruise ships to come in, and how, whether they spent money here or not. Has that been determined yet by your department?
I'm not involved in the docks at all, but certainly I know environmental management and the harbor masters have been very aggressive in applying for these funds to support some of the things they do. But I'm not sure where we are with
No,
that.
I mean, with them coming and spending money at our hotels. I mean, obviously they have accommodations on the boats, but our restaurants, our other attractions, have we been able to capture any data on that?
So I'll let Lee Filson, if, with your permission, from Sea Plymouth, speak to that.
Absolutely. You know, we have these discussions and then it kind of goes away and nobody follows up to see if the discussion really bared out one way or the other. So we have Ms. Aleve Sinclair Folson. You are the director of Sea Plymouth, and the floor
And
is
I'm a
yours.
resident of Plymouth as well. And I wish I had known, I would have brought statistics and stuff, but it's, for many, many reasons, it's been very beneficial for us to have a cruise line stopping, and it would work probably better if we could do some sort of a memorandum or of understanding or something to use the state dock, because it would be easier for the ships to get in and out, and we could allow more than one cruise line if they wanted. We really are only the right size for a couple of them that are out there right now. We had Blount before we had American Cruise Lines, but they stopped coming because they didn't like having to park in the cow yard and then bring people in on a boat and bring them back out. And so that's why it works so well to be able to have a place for to have an actual port for people to come into. American Cruise Lines passengers have voted Plymouth as their favorite stop, we were told not too long ago. And I just had a meeting with them last week to talk about redoing the map and the various stops they make within the town. We've added stops to that. They provide buses. We provide, Sea Plymouth provides 2 ambassadors to go on the buses to tell people about the town and to encourage them to get off at various stops and to see what's there to be used. The people that are patrons of American Cruise Lines it's a very high income group. I think it's a minimum of about $10,000 a person to go on the ship for just the 5 to 7 day cruises. And so we know that they have brought in, and they have really helped in terms of spend. But it's also a good thing to have them because this allows us to bring 104 passengers, not counting the crew, and the crew actually gets off and frequents the town quite a bit as well. You can add another 50 or so from that. But it not only allows that, just remember that you're bringing that many more people in, maybe 28 to 33 times a year, and they're not taking up parking. And the ships are the newest that they have made. They're ecologically and environmentally better than what has been made in the past, and they constantly improve on that. So there are many, many reasons. Also, it helps to move Plymouth into kind of a different orbit by having a cruise line and a port with a cruise line that comes in. And it gives it sort of a new image to Plymouth and makes it a much more attractive to a lot of people to come. A lot of people have come just to watch the ships land and disembark and embark. So, and I apologize, I don't have numbers,
It's
but I
okay.
can provide those if you'd like.
It was a curiosity because we've had discussion and just wondered if it was working out.
It is. It is
Excellent.
very
Well,
much so.
Thank you so much, Ms. Filson. I understand that the Pilgrims voted Plymouth the #1 stop too on their journey.
I think they just ran out of options, actually. But I also point out that I won't name the businesses, but there are local businesses that provide, say, a lobster feed for all of those people. So I know on a few occasions, there are local restaurants who are preparing a lobster bake that is for all those. So although they provide food on that boat, there are benefits that are coming to some of the other communities. And the cow yard is over by Bug Light. It's a deep water mooring, so when you have a bigger boat, they have to go to the cow yard, which is over by Bug Light, and they have to moor out there and then come back and forth with a tender.
Yes,
And
Ms.
that's what,
Richard?
and that's what, where the Mayflower docked.
Yes. But they had rowboats. These are powered.
Excellent. Seeing and hearing no other discussion, I will ask Mr. Trudell for a motion to approve Article 15.
I make a motion to approve Article 15, the Town Promotion Fund.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Howard, would you be so kind as to second that motion to approve Article 15?
Second.
Thank you. I have a first from Mr. Trudell, a second from Mr. Howard. Is there any discussion on our committee about Article 15? Hearing and seeing none, we will vote on whether to recommend to town meeting that they approve Article 15. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes?
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Malaguti?
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Trudell?
Yes.
And that is 12 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstentions. Thank you so much, Mr. Hartman.
Thank you. And I'd
thank
just
you.
like to thank Everett
And Everett.
and Steve for their hard work, too,
And
as
Mr.
volunteers.
Layden, thank you so much. And Ms. Filson, thank you so much for what you do to help the town's tax base and other things. All right. Moving right along, in the interest of time, we are going to talk about Article 19. And I know Dr. Campbell's been waiting patiently for this moment, and I will just introduce it as the Hedge Elementary and Cold Spring School Feasibility Study. This is complicated as I try to read through it, so I will hope that you will school us on Article 19.
I will do, yes, thank you, play on words, yes. Thank you very much for having us this evening. Yes, Article 19 is a feasibility study and schematic design for Hedge and Cold Spring Schools. So a little history and context to this for everyone. So back in July of 2021, the Plymouth Schools, through a capital request, conducted a facilities needs assessment. And this was a task to really look comprehensively at all of our buildings to project the repairs, improvements of each facility that we would need both immediately, short-term, and for the foreseeable future 10 or more years out. We also conducted an existing conditions study which evaluated our elementary buildings in terms of their net school space, more specifically the amount of instructional space that each possesses to meet the needs of the existing populations. That was done about a year and a half ago. Those two studies confirmed a few things. One thing that we already knew, we have very aging elementary schools, which are in need of capital improvements. Two of our aging schools, Hedge is 114 years old and Cold Spring 74 years old. Our others are in the 50s, and one is also in the 70s, Manomet Elementary School. But Hedge and Cold Spring are also undersized according to MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority standards, when we did the existing condition study, by approximately 40% for educational space. If you were to go into our buildings and look at the way that they're being used, we have teachers that have spaces, specialists that have spaces in landings and stairwells because there's no space for the staff to support some of our students. Additionally, both buildings, while also very undersized, according to the state standards, have Little to, limited fire suppression systems, ADA issues, which would only be more complex with future construction on the existing sites, lack of HVAC, and deteriorating interior, among other issues, and that's all in the reports that we've presented before. For the past 2 years, Plymouth Public Schools has submitted a statement of interest, commonly known as an SOI, to the School Building Authority, commonly known as MSBA, in the hope of considering us for a new school or rebuild, part of their core project. This year, after a successful application and a senior study visit from them in the fall, they came out in the fall and visited us, interviewed us, and walked the buildings. The MSBA accepted us into what's called the eligibility period, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So Plymouth Public Schools has been accepted into the MSBA eligibility period to explore the possibility of a consolidation of Hedge and Cold Spring schools and potentially building or renovating a new school in North Plymouth. Okay, so this eligibility period is a 270-day timeframe and completes sort of 8 prerequisite steps. So that's what's in that memo that you mentioned. So once those steps are met, MSBA would invite the district into the feasibility study phase, which is estimated, at the high end, $2 million, because of the feasibility and schematic design, looking at both properties through that process with the state. So those 8 steps include sort of the initial compliance certification, so then an agreement that we follow the MSBA rules and understand the regulations, and it's signed off by local officials, both at the town and school side. The formation of a school building committee, so in addition to the existing building committee, having members that would be focused solely on a school building project, much like for the high schools that were done several years ago. The completion of an educational profile questionnaire, so overview of the current and proposed educational programs there, so they do an analysis of that, or we do it for them and provide them that information. And then what is called an enrollment projection tool. So working, again, this is with the MSBA, where we don't determine what the enrollment would be in a building. They dictate that. So looking at housing developments, enrollment data, potential consolidations, which is part of our project proposal here, which the MSBA was very fond of, to be quite frank. We would have an enrollment meeting with MSBA and the district to review the enrollment projections for building design. And that, again, that number would be determined by MSBA. Keep in mind that this building project could take 5 to 7 years if it comes to fruition. Maintenance and capital planning. This is all the prerequisite work that we're doing right now. Information on the district's maintenance and capital planning practices. One thing that the MSBA is looking for is districts that take good care of their buildings. They were very impressed by the condition of our buildings, the maintenance of our buildings, but also quite impressed by how creative we've gotten with our educational spaces. So they look at those. They're looking for the records of our maintenance and capital planning. And then what we're here for this evening, the local vote authorization. This is Article 19, which will be presented to Springtown meeting. Article 19 is a vote of funding necessary for feasibility study and schematic design phase, which would include costs for project manager, design, testing, and the MSBA submissions. And and lastly, the feasibility study agreement that we understand the outline of the funding reimbursement process through this process. There's more information that can be seen if anyone wants, and I'm happy to send it to you on the Mass School Building Authority website about the entire process, which is 9 modules in its entirety, but this eligibility period is what the feasibility and schematic design ends with, which we're here this evening to request. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you
So
may have.
to be clear, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, for the walkthrough. To be clear, you're asking for $2 million.
Correct.
Mr. Lally, the floor is yours.
So first of all, great work, and your facilities people do a great job, just from my perspective on the building committee. This is $2 million you're asking of local money, or is this authorizing the town to accept state money?
According to Lynn, it would be borrowing.
But it's local money. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Green, the floor is yours, and then I'll go to Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. You'll have to excuse some maybe basic questions because I pretty much know nothing about this. So the MSBA MSBA, is that a state agency?
Yes, that's the state agency that is the grant authority for these projects. So in years past, with North and South High School as a part of those projects, myself, I had the pleasure of working on those. We have received approximately 51% reimbursement for construction costs through those projects.
Gotcha. And the funds, the 2 million, is that going to MSBA or is that going to consultants?
That goes to, so that would be for the feasibility and schematic design, which would include all of those sections that I mentioned, the project manager, the design, the tester. So we would work with the MSBA to get that set up, and then using that information, they would determine what would be feasible for Plymouth in terms of a core project.
That's it for now, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Malaguti, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Howard, you had your hand up earlier. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. On Monday, the Capital Improvements Committee ranked this capital request as number one among the capital requests being forwarded to advisory and finance and then town meeting. How does this Article 19 relate to the capital request that was heard on Monday?
It's the same thing that was presented at the Capitol meeting on Monday. It's part of the capital projects that are proposed.
Okay, so this is not just the vote to the, as you said it in the email, it said that this was to step 7, the local vote authorization. But so does this authorize the capital, or is the capital approved through the capital request process?
Hi, Mr. Howard. This is Dr. Blaisdell, Adam Blaisdell, School Business Administrator. They're actually one and the same. As part of this vote, there's very specific language that the MSBA states that you have to vote on, that the town has to vote on in order to move this forward. So it is a capital request for the $2 million, but it also goes in order with this Article 19 and this vote. So the vote language, and I don't know if you have it, and Jeanette, I don't know if they have it yet, but in the Article 19, it clearly states the language, but it also coincides with the same, it's the same item.
Yes, they were provided the warrant language.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howard. I believe, I thought Mr. Malaguti had your hand up a minute ago.
I did. I'm actually going to defer, if I may, to the other members on the other side of you first.
Okay, deferring to my right, Ms. Butler, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor? Okay, and when I was voting on this yesterday, I was a little confused, but looking into MSBA a little bit, you're saying that it's a 50% reimbursement?
Historically, what we have received based on demographics and everything that we've done in the past for Plymouth North High School construction, which was completed in 2012, and Plymouth South in 2017, it was around 50 to 51% for the construction costs.
Okay, because I'm noticing here that there's a program for roofs, and Federal Furnace got a 32%.
Yes, so the core projects, the accelerated repairs is different.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's for the core project. So there's a core project program that they have, which are the school buildings, and then there's the accelerated repair. We've done a lot of roof projects through that, and that is a varied reimbursement rate.
Okay. In looking at the schools, we know that the enrollment for the schools are going down. Do you have what these two schools have for the numbers for their enrollment now and what you expect it to be in the next 5 years?
Right now, it's pretty flat at the elementary level. We've seen a decline in some of the secondaries, particularly at the middle school. Cold Spring and Hedge, historically, for many, many years now, has gone between 2 and 220. And I would say that's been at least the last 5 years. We're right around there. They're in the low twos, both schools.
Okay.
It's a
And I
very
know-
transient population, so particularly at Hedge, so sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, but it's consistently within that range.
Okay, so it's Hedge is the one that you're going to
So,
keep, so if we,
so we have to prioritize projects to the MSBA, and we prioritized Hedge because, one, it's 114 years old, it has some significant issues, but in that process, we also talked about potential consolidation. The feasibility and schematic design would include looking at both properties, both schools. The MSBA would want us to do that, but Hedge is the sort of the priority project there. Yeah.
I think I heard yesterday that Hedge has like 7 acres or something?
Cold Spring has about 7.6,
Oh, okay.
and we have about just over 2 at Hedge.
Oh, okay, so I know usually you like the one with larger.
It's so the MSBA, so the building would be much larger, I can tell you that. MSBA standards, getting back to when I talked about that existing conditions study, when you go to this school, when it was built in 1914, 114 years ago, it was a different time. We have 12 classrooms at Hedge, for example. Those are the only instructional spaces. We have a lot of students who receive special education support, EL support. There's no common area to work with students. There's no conference areas. The cafeteria is very, very small, and the kitchen is essentially in the cafeteria. So the conditions there are pretty significant, and so the building would be quite larger for sure. But that would be dictated by the MSBA. So the MSBA comes in, they look at our enrollment, they look at birth projections, they look at new growth. They're looking at projected building projects within the next 5 years, or housing projects in the next 5 years. So they look at all that data and they give us a number. This is the number that we anticipate that you would need based on your total enrollment, geography, and existing new developments. So the state is very strict with that, and they bring in their own staff to support that process.
Okay, so with the reduction in enrollment, you're saying that the elementary school seems to be fine, but we're taking away one school and putting everyone into the other school. Would the enrollment be such that it would be better to put the students, put them into an existing school and take away both these schools?
So when we did a redistricting exercise several years ago, I think it's about 4 years ago, and we looked at some of those things. The issue is, our enrollment is down, right? It's definitely down. I've been here for 17 years. I've lived here for 25. It's down. We're flat. We're plateaued though. We are plateauing. We were like a little over 7,000. We're at 7,100 now. Our preschool numbers are going up 40%. So we're seeing some changes, right? We don't know how much, but it's pretty consistent. We're in the 7,000s. In the last 10 years, like if you were to go in, with our enrollment down, you'd be like, you must have all this extra space in your schools, right? One would assume. We have invested in the last 10 years significantly in our special education programs in our district. So if you were to go into our schools, you would see, with the exception of one classroom that I'm aware of at Manomet Elementary, no additional classroom spaces because we utilize them for our programs. We have students that receive pretty considerable support through special education who otherwise would be educated in a collaborative program or a private placement, but we're able to keep them here. So not only doing right by our kids, but we're actually saving the taxpayers money by investing in our program. So we don't, to kind of get back to your original question, we don't have enough space to move both schools to another school. But we could, the idea of consolidating 2 schools into a newer facility, which would be slightly larger than it wouldn't be twice as big, but larger, that would accommodate that, I think would also help us to prioritize capital projects in the future for our other aging buildings. As I said, we have our elementary schools 4 of them are 50 years old, 2 are in the 70s, and 2 are over 100 years old. So we're really trying to prioritize capital projects, and we know that, funding is limited. We try to get creative with how we spread that capital out to maintain our roofs, to extend the life of those. And we're also trying to be mindful of the fact that we don't want to put millions of dollars into an aging facility that is educationally is not the best floor plan and space, and taking that into consideration, hence the application, and that's why the state thought that it was a very good project.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell.
You're welcome.
Back again. Okay, Mr. Lawler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been fortunate enough to take a tour of Hedge with Dr. Campbell, and I can tell you that the Hedge School is in tough shape. We spent some time there, went to the classrooms, toured the heating system and the caves.
That's okay.
It is in tough shape. The students are packed. The auditorium is makeshift. The stairwells are used for conferencing. Cold Spring is a little bit more roomier, has a little more breadth to it. What I'm trying to say here is that I know the Hedge School has some major issues. How we're weighing this, again, the population, student population is flat.
Correct.
Have you considered or thought about renovating Cold Spring itself and bringing that into a facility that could house both?
So that's a very good question, Mr. Lawler, and actually that will be a part of this process. So that's why we submitted both, to do the feasibility and schematic design, taking into consideration both schools. The MSBA would make that determination. So they would determine whether or not we would need a new building or we could renovate and expand an existing building. So that will be a part of that process with MSBA, and they will make that determination on what they would fund based on what they feel is most feasible, both educationally and practically in terms of finances.
In the feasibility portion,
Yeah.
and the design, specifically the design portion of the feasibility stage, will we be creating our own design, or we will be using probably one of the 351 cities and towns that have erected other schools? Are we starting from scratch with the
Another very good question.
with the design?
So that will depend on whether or not we have the option for a model school. So as you know, we've had two projects over the last 13 years here with MSBA. One which was a model school, Plymouth North High School. So with Plymouth North High School, if you go to Marshfield, Norwood, Whitman-Hanson, Franklin, you're going to see a very similar school, almost identical. That saves a lot of time, money, resources through that process. With South High School, there was no model school for a comprehensive vocational, so we weren't eligible to do that. We very well may, depending on what the options are from MSBA, be able to entertain that, which is something that I think would be certainly makes sense if that would be something that would be provided as an option to us. But we have to wait for the state to determine that.
But my concern is that $2 million, right, Is that $2 million that price because we're choosing to buy a design? Or, so help me with the 2 million
The
itself.
2 million is simply to do the feasibility and the schematic design to determine what would be feasible.
So the schematic, right, would
Very
be
schematic.
the
It's not.
design, right?
Yes, but not full design, not full design. So schematic design, basically, you can build a building for X amount of students, or we can do a renovation expansion for X amount of students. At that point, we would be looking for an architecture firm and doing that, or, to your point, if the availability of doing, we'd still have an architecture firm, but it would accelerate the process with MSBA if we could go for a model school as an option. But the feasibility is, they're just determining what is feasible for the town of Plymouth in terms of a project.
So who comes up with the $2 million price tag?
The
Is it-
MSBA recommended that to us. That wasn't an arbitrary number. When we had that senior study visit and they did the walk and they understood the scope of what we were looking at, they said to fund $2 million, to budget $2 million. They could come in less than that, but they said to be safe, budget $2 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, I am.
All right, Mr. Malaguti, the floor is finally yours.
Thank you. So my first question, based upon the earlier comments that were made for the actual scope of this to go out for Hedge and Cold Spring, was one of the criteria was the deteriorating interiors. So with the emphasis more on Hedge, so we have 2 elementary schools that are over 100 years old. So what were the deterioration interiors comparative to both those schools and the maintenance to both of those schools, if we are saying that 2 built within 5 years of each other, that one was superiorly more maintained than the other one in this essence?
Yeah, I don't even know if I would say superiorly maintained, but the other school being Nathaniel Morton. You may recall a couple of years ago, we did an emergency procurement for a roof because the roof was saturated. That building is in much better shape now. The original part is over 100 years old. The front, I call it the addition, was built in the 1930s, so it's a slightly younger part of that, but it is in better condition. I could send you the report, Mr. Malaguti, so you could see the feasibility study in its entirety, but I can't speak to the specifics regarding the comparisons of the interior. I do know that a few years ago, we were having significant leak issues at Nathaniel Morton, our other 100-plus-year-old building. Again, we had to do an emergency procurement and fix that roof. We used, if you may recall, we used some federal funds, to supplement that project as well. Fortunately, because we literally had, when we took the guns to the ceiling to look at saturation, it was just flooded with water. The water that was penetrating both the roof and the issues with the outside, not the cupola, having word retrieval issues up here. The drainage from the exterior near the roof was saturating the brick, and it was actually deteriorating that. That's been resolved. But I can send you, I don't have the specifics in comparison to those schools. Nathaniel Morton, too, is a much bigger facility, much more spacious, so there's really no, in terms of educational space, there's no comparison to the two of them.
Thank you. Mine was more based upon maintenance of the 2 buildings and the integrity of both of them, since both are basically brother and sister, identical twins of age. So that's why I was basing it on the maintenance, if one had a little bit more priority than the other for that over the years, and that caused some of excessive deterioration in one over the other. My other one, and this was a couple comments that my colleagues made as well too, with the redistricting study, because I attended a few of those meetings as well too, that some of the recommendations within that, especially for the elementary schools, left for the projection rates and for the existing rates, that if we just shifted a little bit, that hedge may be like 5% either way, depending on those rates, but there was still a large vacancy factor at Nathaniel Morton based upon those. I think there was, that was the largest vacancy factor of all the elementary schools that still had room in there based upon capacity needs, based upon the studies authors that was done during that. Was there essence within that, and granted I do know that the schools need work, was there thought about that of even just slightly shifting lines, at retrograding even like a couple streets or whatever down, so you could fill that, so each school had a almost equal vacancy factor, but you were utilizing spaces more accurately?
Yes, certainly there were a lot of different scenarios that were looked at. One was to populate Nathaniel Morton more with, and there was one to close Hedge, if you may recall that.
I do very well.
Yeah, that, and again, that came from committee and recommendations from a consultant. It wasn't something that I was personally recommending, but I felt the need to put every option out there for the community so the community could speak to that. That would certainly would tighten things up significantly. But to your question, I'm sorry, Mr. Malaguti, was there a study that looked at moving the district boundary slightly to populate Nathaniel Morton?
Yes, I didn't know if that was either a thought during committee discussions when the things came out, if there was like a possible, I'm not saying more theoretically, like say if you shifted like 2 streets over this way or that way, that it would sort of even out in a way. I know that you don't want to disrupt large communities of people, because that would basically fracture friend and teacher relations and all that with students, but I just didn't know if that was a thought within that process of that.
Sure. So there was definitely a thought. And there was also a thought that hypothetically, if it's say 5 to 7 years down the road, we needed to move a school community during construction, that we could move them. It would help us to have that space so that we could do that during construction, understanding that when MSBA comes in, they may say, you need a building of X amount of size because you could relocate students to Nathaniel Morton, for example. If that the case, the building would be X amount, would be only so big, but during the construction, we could alleviate some of that to, the classes would get a little larger in some of the schools during construction, but it would allow us to keep kids together.
Okay, thank you. And I'll save the rest during discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe, Ms. Richards, you would like the floor, and it is yours.
Thank you. So I too have an issue with the $2 million price tag. So the feasibility study phase following schematic design. So is it a requirement to have the schematic design?
As part of that, yes. All of this.
I mean, I know it's part of it, but does it have to be part of it?
Yes. Yeah, we didn't. We did not determine what's included in this process.
Okay. So these two. So when you get this feasibility study and schematic design back, I'm assuming it's going to have several options.
It could. Yes, it could.
I'm hoping it will,
Yes,
so that we have options.
I would hope so too. Yes, I don't want to say something
because for $2
definitive.
million, if there's no option,
Yep.
Options on whether what we do, then that would be a waste of $2 million.
Yeah, and the
if
MSBA does not want to waste too, so they're very particular what projects that they will support, and they want to give options to the community, and they do appreciate the consolidation efforts, and they're looking at projects more favorably with that in mind.
Okay, because you're talking about, potentially expanding on one of the schools and, or building a new school. I'm assuming your preference would be to build a new school.
In many cases, it's less expensive, yes,
Then why spend the $2 million?
because we don't have a choice. The state makes us do it. If we want grant funds to reimburse the project, at upwards of 50 to 51% of that construction cost, we have no choice. The state dictates that process.
Okay, so if they dictate that process, I would hope and expect that we get option,
Yeah,
option
I agree.
A, B, and C.
Yes, at least A and B. Yes, I would
And
hope
D.
for options.
I would
yes.
expect D as well. I would want lots of options.
Yes.
Whether to add on, and my thinking is add on to the school that has the most space.
For sure.
You're
Yeah,
talking, so we're talking about Nathaniel Morton, and it's still in existence. I went there.
My three
And,
children went through there as well, yeah.
Yeah, it's
a beautiful
not a great
building.
place. It's,
Well-
it was an institution. Coming from Lexington and then going there for 1 year,
Okay.
it wasn't a great place. But it's still in existence. We're still using it. I'm sure the children love it. But you've said they added on 1930?
Yes, so the Lincoln Street part, I think it's 1932. Yeah, it's in the 30s.
Yeah, so it's still, so adding on to Cold Springs isn't out of the realm of possibility, considering it's on 7 acres.
I agree, yes. I feel strongly that the 7.6 acre lot is something that is attractable, and MSBA would look favorably at that, for sure.
And so my thinking is Hedge School is probably off the table.
I would find it hard to believe, I don't think there's enough acreage to build a school, or certainly to expand, or to build a school there. Yes, I think if we're looking at something, again, I'm forecasting what MSBA is going to determine, but I believe, and the existing condition study that we did, and which I did not include when I mentioned that both of these buildings are sort of, their net space is very, very low. They believe that the Cold Spring parcel of land was most suitable for an expansion or new build.
And you'll have to excuse my questions, because
That's okay.
also
That's fine.
being on the school, budget subcommittee,
Yes,
it's
of
kind of
course.
it'll segue into that.
Yeah.
Because if we're then putting money, dumping money into Hedge School when, maybe 5 years down the road, we're going to be,
So we're
it's gonna
really
be a
trying
tear
to,
down.
yeah, so we're trying to prioritize all of our capital projects as much as possible. So we're not, you'll notice we're not looking for a major roof, we're trying to spread our capital funds out to as many buildings as we possibly can. We're looking at new technologies to see if our roofs would be eligible to try to maintain the life of those roofs for another 5, 10, 15 years. We're really trying to stretch those dollars as far as we can when looking at, and particularly with a school like Hedge, the roof needs to be tight. We don't want, so we're really prioritizing the envelope of the buildings. Safety and security, obviously, if there's an issue there. But beyond that, particularly for the schools where we're looking for another option, we're trying to avoid capital. Another reason is, as you probably know, when you do so many projects on an existing property, for example, if we reach 33% of the assessed value of that school with capital projects in a 3-year period, we have to bring the whole building up to ADA compliance. We would never be able to do that. It would cost millions. We got an ADA assessment of our 1-level buildings, Indian Brook, South Elementary, Federal Furnace, and West. You're looking at $1.5 million just for those buildings. So it's just, it's not a good use of money, and we're certainly mindful of that.
How many students are at Hedge?
About 210, between two, it varies from 205 to 220, typically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know when we met with with the presentation that you made, you handed out a one-pager which had all the schools and their year they were built.
Yes.
So for reference material, you can see the ages.
They're right here if you want a
Schools.
copy. Yeah.
And you have it right in
I
your
do,
hand.
yes.
That's the one. So, good. All right, Mr. Snyder, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm having deja vu here because another town that I served on the FinCom recently put into the MSBA for a new elementary school. Their school was literally falling apart. They spent $1.5 million. MSBA gave them a couple choices, and the town people did not want to pay more taxes and voted it down. And they're trying to get it voted again, and it's going to get voted down again. What happens then? We take the $2 million, we spend it on the MSBA. They come back, they say, we have a $50 million elementary school we recommend. And the townspeople here say, hey, my taxes are already up through the roof. I don't want to spend more money on taxes for another building.
Sure.
What do we do then?
Completely get it. I'm a taxpayer for 25 years, right? And very mindful and a lot of conversation about that. And it's real. And we're working directly with the town finance director, with Lynn, looking at the existing debt and when that's coming down and trying to be mindful of when that, ask would be. Again, it's 5 to 7 years out. I don't know. I'm concerned about the alternative if we don't do this. I'm trying to approach this by consolidating facilities and not putting capital into multiple aging buildings. I think it's much more feasible and better use of the taxpayer dollars if we're going to get grants, particularly about 50 to 51% of that construction reimbursed to invest in new construction with a consolidated approach so that we can minimize the request moving forward. But that's always, to your point, Mr. Snyder, that's always a risk with this. When I've been here, again, 25 years, I was here for the first vote in 2001 for North High School. It failed. I was here for the debt exclusion for the high schools and the senior center in 2006, which ultimately passed. So there's always a gamble in that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They even, the people in the school department are very smart, and they marketed it. And they said, listen, if you don't vote for this, we're going to have to put modulars up to accommodate the people that are in that school. And it's going to be temporary, and they're going to have to get rid of them in a number of years. And that didn't seem to do the trick. People are very, very conscious of the money in their wallets right now and the way it's been disappearing. So I'm a little concerned that this may have a little trouble passing if it's for $45, $50 million or something like that, even if half of it's paid for by the state. It's still, borrowing, and it's still going to affect people's pocketbooks. That's just my concern, and really is, anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And Mr. Lawler, the floor is yours.
Dr. Campbell, are you saying that, the process is probably groundbreaking would be 5 to 7 years down the line?
5-7 years completion, probably a year and a half
completion.
for construction at the end of that. So you're looking at like 3.5, 4 years out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. Any further discussion? I guess I'm wondering how we ended up in a crisis situation. Did we see this coming years ago, that the school was going to be bursting at the seams and we were going to be needing to do this?
Well, it's been like this for a while, I can tell you. It just hasn't been something that we've considered. I mean, we had two Plymouth North High School, as you may recall. Again, that building was opened, I think, in 1967. It wasn't that old. South High School certainly was not that old. 1987, I believe, right? That was a shame, in my opinion. The MSBA has changed their approach, have a good handle on what's happening with the owner's project manager and the process that they dictate, which can be frustrating, but it's ended up with some very good projects. We've been very beneficial. We've benefited from that. So we have really good quality buildings, and one of them is being replicated across the Commonwealth because of that model school. So it's been an issue. I've worked here for 17 years. Dr. Blaisdell was a principal at Hedge many years ago. So he knows those conditions. The building has been like this for many, many years. And again, the population has fluctuated, but we have, again, as the educational leader of the school, and that's my role, right? We have aging elementary schools, and the two northernmost schools are probably the most in need, both objectively, from what we've had for independent and third-party analysis, but also on a day-to-day, if you walk in and you see the conditions, while the population is level, the complexity of our students, the needs of our families, particularly in North Plymouth, which is probably, in those two schools, the most economically diverse, economically disadvantaged. We have approximately 46% of the students in Hedge do not speak English fluently, and as their families don't as well, in addition to all of the special education support that they're receiving. So we have some of our neediest kids being supported in the least favorable conditions currently. So as the superintendent, if I were to make a recommendation of a part of our community to look at, I would suggest these two. So there's been a lot of priorities, but we understand we're also realistic. We have to be reasonable in terms of when to ask, when to approach, when's the right time. It's never the right time, but when would be the best time to entertain this. So
I imagine the morale of the staff is not that great.
it's fantastic, and I'll tell you, they're wonderful. It's a wonderful building, full of wonderful people who have just gotten used to working in. And I would, again, Mr. Lawler mentioned going through, Mr. Snyder had visited as well. I would gladly take anyone through any of our schools, really, so you can see that. Yeah, I think the spirits are up. The people there really enjoy what they do. But, it's tough when your desk is in a stairwell and you don't have a conference room to meet with a family, and your gym is also your art and music room, and it's also, by the way that you get from one side of the building to the other, because you can't go from one top floor to the other without going down the stairs and going through the gym. So it's just not designed for education today. So, but the staff they're wonderful.
Okay, excellent. Any further questions? Yes, Ms. Richards, the floor is yours.
Just kind of a sort of off the wall. I was just thinking about something. So I worked at the old Registry of Deeds building, a 100-year-old building, for 20 years, 20, maybe a little less. Asbestos, lead paint. I'm assuming the schools have it all.
Yeah, we've done a lot. You want to talk about the asbestos abatement?
Sure. We've done a lot with asbestos abatement at both schools, but there's a lot still there.
Yeah.
When you look at if you were to look at our 10-year capital plan, a couple years ago when we had the facilities assessment done, they kind of lined out projects that need to be done at both of those schools, and the list was long. Things like looking at windows and reglazing windows, roofing at Cold Spring. Asbestos was brought up in that report over and over and over again, the things that need to be addressed. They're fine because it's encapsulated right now, but if we do any project that goes on there, you then have to have asbestos abatement done at the same time, which raises the cost of that particular project. So if you were to look at our 10-year capital plan, the projects that are on that list for the next upcoming years for Hedge and Cold Spring go into the millions and millions of dollars. And then, as Dr. Campbell brought up, the ADA compliance piece. If we would have to put an elevator at both of those buildings, I don't know what those would cost, and I don't know where it would go. So that's the other piece that comes into place, and that's why we don't want to necessarily put some major project money into these buildings because it might add up, and by the time we're done, we could be pretty close. When
And you still have, yeah, and you still have issues. Just one other question. Are you also looking at other facilities? Maybe other industrial facilities that could be converted?
When we met with AI3 was the architectural firm that did the existing condition study for us. I worked with the town and got a list of properties that were out there. There's really nothing that the town owns that we could use for property. So we would then have to buy a property in addition to building the building as well. There was nothing that we haven't gone to that point yet in regards to the commercial buildings and so forth. That might be a conversation that comes up in one of these studies as
Well,
well.
and I'm just thinking about the DPW building, administration building that they're renovating, they purchased, so something along those lines that sort of already has some infrastructure. Thank you.
You've certainly been in some old buildings. I got that out of this meeting. Oh, my word. Say it isn't so. Okay, any other further questions for Dr. Campbell? Thank you for your patience in answering our questions. That's why we're here. And without further ado, Mr. Pizarro, would you please make a motion to approve Article 19?
So moved.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Malaguti, would you please make a motion to second Article 19?
Second.
Thank you. We have a first from Mr. Pizarro and a second from Mr. Malaguti. And I know somebody over there named Mr. Lally is chomping at the bit. Floor is yours.
For discussion, first of all, we've seen this project coming through the building committee for several months, and it got unanimous support at our meeting last week. Secondly, in order to get the state funds, it's the MSBA way or not. Two, another important takeaway is this is really a twofer. They're looking at two buildings as part of this study, and the $2 million is an estimate because you don't want to have to go back to the well. So that doesn't mean that's what's the final cost is going to be for the feasibility study and the and probably programmatic and schematic design. So I think it's yes, it's high, and I think it's high on purpose because you don't want to have to go back to the well. So the other thing is you got two tired old buildings, and they're the gift to keep on taking. And I think it would be very helpful when you go to town meeting that you have some numbers that in order to do the kind of renovations, here's what's going to require to get up to ADA standards or MAB standards, and also the amount of deferred maintenance you're addressing those buildings with whatever the recommendation is going to be. I think in my former life those are good selling points. And I think having a handle on the cost per square foot for the feasibility study would be a good number to be able to tell people too, just to put it in perspective. I found that those are good selling points. So I think there's been a lot of due diligence on this, and I'm certainly going to support it. I think there was a lot of competition to get into this tranche this year, and we're lucky that the staff here has put together a project that got the interest of the state. So I'm voting for it, by the way.
I kind of got that impression. Okay. Yes, Mr. Lawler.
I'm going to vote yes on this, believe it or not. Only because I've been to the Hedge School. I went through there with Dr. Campbell. And I think it's about time that we spend the money on replacing that facility. The Cold Spring, it's a little bit better. You probably have to get pretty creative. The $2 million, I guess Mr. Lally is saying that's, you have to, that's what they're asking for, and that's something we have to come up with.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawler. Mr. Snyder, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The hedge definitely needs to be replaced. And the only way to go about it is to go through the MSBA. So I'm hoping that you guys put together some kind of slideshow or something to show people the alternatives where they'd vote no to it. And also the possibility that we could sell those buildings for reuse. I know that some of the other towns have sold their old schools and they become senior centers and different things like that, senior housing. So I hope that we can sell it to the townspeople because we definitely do need a new school. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Mr. Malaguti, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Well, this one, it's going to be slightly biased for me in a way, and I'm only stating it for this reason. Like Ms. Richards said, when she attended Nathaniel Morton, almost my entire family attended Hedge. The other part of my family attended Cold Spring, so it's basically a dual sword. With this, I understand the intricacies of the building. I constantly go through Hedge as well too. I enjoyed, as a kid, the tunnel going to the nurse's station from the lunchroom and the subterranean library and all the other aspects of it. While I know that the schools need work on it, I would like to take a word that was done during the discussion of the presenter for a couple of the other schools, and that would be shameful. So when we were talking about the ages of them, and the word shameful came up for Plymouth North and Plymouth South as the non-longevity of those buildings. One of these buildings, along with the other mentioned building, have stood the test of time for 3/4 to well over a century. And I'm using the word shameful as that one of the century-old ones has been kept a lot better maintained per the assessments and everything than another 100-year-old building. So one, if this does pass town meeting and does go pass again, either town meeting or a townwide vote for the reconstruction or rebuild of a combined school, that we don't have the shameful aspect that I'm stating of, and that it's on the same maintenance level as the other 100-year-old building has, or other newer buildings have, so that one section of town is not disparaged for spite of another one, in my opinion. With this, I would like to support this, but I am torn between other community members and other school members, and I will be not supporting this article. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malaguti. I saw Ms. Richards, your hand went up first, and then I'll go to Mr. Green.
And thank you, Mr. Malaguti, for your comments. And my children actually went to Indian Brook, where they also had modules. And that being said, my oldest was also redistricted, and he went to Indian Brook, South Elementary, or South Middle School, PCIS. And then we said, that's it. We're all done here. So, although I'm not even sure if the modules are still at Indian Brook, are they? So those are the temporary modules that were in place, and my son is 35. And so he was 9 when those modules went in place. So, yeah, we can't keep putting Band-Aids on. We have to address these problems, but you're correct, Mr. Malaguti, we have to correct them properly. And I was around for building and voted in favor of building South High School. And it was an eyesore to begin with. And that was a big waste of my money and all of the rest of the taxpayers' money. So I'm praying that does not happen again. So, but I will be in favor of this study.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Richards, I'm going to go to Mr. Green. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support this project, and for a reason that Ms. Richards briefly touched upon, but when they built schools back in the day, they built them quick, and they were able to get it done, good for them, and pay for it. But they also put a lot of horrifically toxic chemicals in these schools that we're dealing with the effects of now. Lead, asbestos. Burlington, Vermont's dealing with massive PCB issues in their schools. We got to get our kids out of schools and environments that are full of dangerous, toxic chemicals. So anything that can accomplish that, I'm in favor of, including this.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Okay. Hearing and seeing no further discussion, we are going to take the vote on Article 19. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Malaguti?
No.
Ms. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
And Mr. Trudell.
Yes.
So this passes 11 in favor, 1 opposed, 0 abstained, to recommend to town meeting to approve Article 19. Thank you very much to our hardworking school system. I'll identify you in a second. Dr. Camels and Blaisdell, thank you very much for your hard work. I know you guys hardly sleep with all the school buildings and all the work that you have to do, but we appreciate that our future rests on your shoulders. Yep. Okay, Mr. Lyden, could you please go up to the podium and identify your name and your address?
Steve Lyden, 33 Leewood Way in Plymouth, town meeting member from Precinct 17. You know, I've been hearing a lot of things about the schools and the conditions, but I'm getting the impression that it was the school's fault. And it really wasn't, because the school has put in for a lot of repairs to their schools. They go to the capital outlay and expenditure committees, and then the priorities were set, and then it goes to the town manager and the Lynn Barrett, and they're the ones that can say, oh no, we can't do half of these. So that's why a lot of the school work at the schools haven't been done. I talk about the old South High School. Well, it took how many overrides to get that done, because it was built on the cheap, and that's what we got, was cheap. So it's not the school's fault, it's everyone's fault. And I'm getting the feeling that the school's getting slammed because, oh, your schools are this, your schools are that, but, you know, it wasn't just the schools, it was the whole town. And at our last capital meeting, we had the new facilities director, and his explanations on what he wanted to do and what projects were there and what he was doing to save money and to make these projects last. So the schools are doing something. It's not like they're not doing anything, because they are. And, you know, I just was getting that impression that we're dumping on the schools because of the conditions of the buildings, but it's not all the schools. It was basically all of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Layden, for for your insight. And I would just say, I hope that you don't walk away with the impression that we're dumping on the schools.
Not you, but it's just, you know, the impression that the schools in such bad condition. It's not, you know, what you were saying, it's just the schools are full of it. I just want, you know, to get that impression that it's not this committee, it's everyone thinks the school, you know, the schools are in bad shape and they're not doing their job, and they are.
Right, well, I mean, okay, I appreciate that. I mean, it's a really difficult issue, because some taxpayers don't have children or had children that are not in the school system, and you're asking them to foot the bill for something that they don't see the value, but there is value in an educated workforce and an educated community. But it's really hard to get everybody on the same page to give up that kind of taxpayer money to benefit the school system. But in the short term, in the long term, it benefits us all. But you're going to have detractors. You just are. It's just the way life is. So, thank you all. Okay, that wraps up our most exciting part of our meeting. And now, is there any old or new business anybody would like to put on the table? Ms. Butler.
Yes, I'd like to put something new on. I would love to have Lynn Barrett come and talk with us to understand better how she sees things. I was at a meeting yesterday, and people were saying, oh, we want this money, and no problem, that's free cash. I'm thinking, no, free cash isn't free cash. So I would like to have her explain, so I understand all that she's doing.
Would you care to write up some questions ahead of time, maybe, to give her some ability to prepare?
Sure.
Would you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. And great, and in that same vein, I have reached out to Jeanette to reach out to the new school board chair, because there was a question last meeting, and that is, what does the school board do? So I thought it might be a good idea to have the school board come in and tell us what the school board does. So that would be along the same lines. Yes, Ms. Richards.
Since we just got our agenda for next week, and I was reading ahead.
Well, look at you.
I know. And Articles 16, 17, and 18, CPC. So since we're going to be starting to look at CPC articles, I would very much like to see their budget.
Isn't that in the Article 19?
I have Articles
I mean,
16, 17, 18.
Yeah, 18. It's not in 18? It's the fiscal
No.
26 budget.
Well, I guess that's their budget, but I'd like some kind of explanation as to what they're spending it on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, two of them are to reduce the spending on projects, but the third is their 2026 budget, which every year they bring their fiscal year budget to us for approval.
Right.
So I would imagine we're going to get a walkthrough.
But, so we've got an estimated 2026 CPA revenues.
Uses, it's under uses.
Uses, but we don't have any specifics as
Okay.
far as what they've spent it on,
Okay,
what the, balance, all of the balances as far as they've spent it on X, and this is what's left.
do you think, Jeanette, we could get the word out to get some further details?
Detailed
And the
budget.
numbers.
Ms. Barrett will be at next week's meeting, so if you want to, again, as he suggested to Ms. Butler, maybe you prepare a couple of questions and get them to her ahead of time, so she's prepared to answer them at the meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ask and you shall receive here. Mr. Malaguti, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. I was only going to say one, but I have another one. This was brought up by Ms. Richards just recently. For the CPC, I know in the past couple cycles when articles were brought up for the select board that Ms. Barrett was talking about, that we have funds and they were going through like old ones that still had reserved that didn't get spent, and I was wondering if we could get that sort of a list as well too, so we can see what projects still have money that's after the final closeout for those projects, and so that gives us a better understanding for the budget. The other question that I have, and this is due to me being a little late for the meeting today, for the facility capital fund. So and I don't know if this was brought up, and that's why I'm asking this. In the past, when I've asked this question, others asked this question as to, we keep putting money into the fund, and it's for capital expenditures for our facilities. My questions at those times were, if we are putting money in for this and we have all these dire needs for it, why aren't we just throwing the money at those now? And the response was that we're putting the money in, and then we will develop a plan to figure out how to disperse the money. Did they talk about what the plan is? Because if we're not going to have a plan, then it's going to be like the discussion that I walked into when we were talking about this nuclear mitigation fund, that we have a plan, but the plan is not laid out at all, and we're just doing another piggy bank of cash.
So to answer your question, there was not a discussion of a plan to spend. None of that money, according to the town manager, has been spent. There have been no withdrawals. And it appears that it's like that rainy day fund for something extraordinary that they need the money for. But there was we were not privy to a distribution plan at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lally.
So I think in the last couple of years, the town has gone to, I think, a 3 or 5 year look ahead on the capital plan, and we should just probably see what that capital plan, get that as a report. I don't know that it's in our budget binders, but then I haven't looked through mine yet. I just got it last night. Yeah, but we would want to see what the capital plan, the rolling 5 year, 3 year plan is that would address both facilities and other capital needs of the town. Would be handy to have if we don't have it already, and I confess I haven't read all of this yet.
You haven't? You just got it? You're going to have to stay after this meeting for an extra 10 minutes of detention.
Okay. Detention.
You got it. You remember that back in the old days?
I do.
Okay. Vividly. Okay. Any other old, new, other business? Would you like to make a public comment? No? And no other further public comments? Then we get to my most favorite part of our meeting, the adjournment. So, Mr. Malaguti, would you like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. And I'm going to go over to Mr. Trudell. Would you please second motion to go into
I would
adjournment?
second that motion.
Thank you so much. Any discussion? Of course not. Okay. Ms. Butler, how
Yes.
do you vote? Thank
Yes.
you. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yeah.
Mr. Lally?
You betcha.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Malaguti?
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder? He stepped out, so we're not going to count him. Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Trudell?
Yes.
And we're going to recommend to town meeting that they allow us to adjourn, unanimous. And we will see you next week at this time. And the joint advisory, select, and school board meeting has been deferred all the way to the 28th, I believe is the date. 28th, okay. And we are adjourned, 9:18.